and I'm happy to see you with us for this last module 6 of our webinar series. In our online training, we will have 3 webinars in this 6th module. During our previous webinars, we spoke a lot with you about different violence prevention strategies, and it is time for us to discuss what should we do and how should we work when the child became victim of violence, particularly of sexual nature. How should we work together with specialists from different fields in order to provide to a child the necessary services in different areas like health, social protection, criminal justice, and avoiding as much as possible additional stress or secondary victimization. So today we have the opportunity to have with us Ólöf, Ásta, Farestveit. She is leader of Barnahus Center in Iceland. Many of you, I know, are already familiar with the Barnahus model, as it is a very much promoted model on international level, particularly in the European region. And today it will be a great occasion for you to see how it is functioning and why it is functioning like this from an inside practitioner. And for participants unfamiliar with Barnahus, you will learn a really unique model of multidisciplinary center aiming to make the services for children victims of violence as friendly as possible. So just before giving the floor to Ólöf, I would like to remind you to mute yourself during the session. We will have the question and answer parts after the presentation, and the session will be done as usual during 2 hours with a 10 minutes break in the middle. So please, Ólöf, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay. I hope everyone can see my slides now. Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be with you here today. As Diana told you, my name is Ólöf Ásta, and I'm leader of Barnahus here in Iceland, which is the first Barnahus in Europe. And now we know it's spread all over Europe, and I have been part of this of the project in implementing Barnahus all over Europe. So I'm very happy to be here with you today. And I will talk around 45 minutes, and then we have some break or then we can have some questions, and I try to answer them. And then we have 10 minutes break, and then we will continue. I will continue. Before Barnahus here in Iceland, there was a lack of coordination between the Child Protection Service, the police, prosecution, and the health service. And there was also a lack of specialization here in Iceland and lack of interdisciplinary approach. So the child was subjected to repeated interviews conducted by many interviewers in different locations, and it was difficult for children to disclose for many people in different locations and so on. And children in some rural areas in Iceland, they did not get appropriate assessment or treatment or therapy or support they needed. So what we saw back in the days was that there was re-victimization for those children or re-traumatization. So this is a picture which is quite good if we think about what Barnahus is all about. Barnahus is all about like one-stop shop for the child. So back in the old days, if we take an example of the 5-year-old Robin who told her teacher about sexual abuse, then she needed to inform the police officer about what happened to her. She was also asked by the Child Protection Service, by the doctor, and the child's lawyer needed to get information from the child. And in the end, the child might have been talking to 5, 6, or 7 people, or even more. And if you think about children's disclosure, and especially young children, they are not able to disclose so many times and always asked maybe leading questions, which is not helpful for children in that age. So what happens today is that the child discloses to someone grown up or someone the child trusts, and no one is supposed to ask the child any other questions until the child has reached Barnahus. So it's very important that we focus on that the grown-ups and the people working in that field listen to the child and talk to the child and listen to the child's disclosure. So the mission of Barnahus is to facilitate collaboration and coordination of the Child Protection Service, the police, the prosecution, and the medical profession in investigation of child sexual abuse cases. What Barnahus also is to provide a child-friendly setting for those joint investigative interviews and the medical examination, and to ensure that the professional implementation of the investigative interviews. Mission is also to ensure that the child victim and his or her family receives appropriate treatment, assessment, and support. Since sexual abuse cases affects the whole family often. If it's within the family, the case happens, or if it's someone outside the family or the circle of trust, it's very important to support the family also. And the mission of Barnahus is also to establish professional work practices and guidelines by interdisciplinary cooperation. Our mission is also to enhance specialized knowledge on sexual abuse and mediate and knowledges as appropriate to professionals and the public alike. And the main mission is, of course, not to harm the child. This is maybe the most difficult thing the child goes through, is talk about sexual abuse. And of course, we also interview children who have been physically abused or are witnessing in domestic violence. But the main point is not to harm the child by re-victimizing the child. So the basic functions of Barnahus is that we have been working for over 22 years now. Barnahus was established 1st of November 1998 here in Iceland. And we have sexual abuse cases from 3.5 up to 18 years old, mostly. Then we are focusing on the forensic interviewing. We also have a forensic interview for children who have been physically abused and children who are witnessing in domestic violence. And we are also interviewing children with our methods and our protocol, children who are unaccompanied coming to Iceland. So as you can see on the picture, it's like a normal family house. It's in a residential area and doesn't have any signs on the house, outside, or marked. So every child or every parent who come to Barnahus can be like anonym for the environment. We also have different kind of forensic interviews, like investigative interviews. I will go deeper into that later. We also have exploratory interviews and interview for unaccompanied children, as I mentioned. It's also important to tell you that we, of course, serve children who are younger than 3.5-year-old, but we can't interview younger children. They can come for a medical examination and the parents can get support. in Barnahus. We also serve children sometimes up to 20 if they have reached or been interviewed before the age of 18. They can continue therapy until they are 20 if they want themselves. In Barnahus, we have also medical examination, and then we get doctors, and I will go a little bit deeper into that later, doctors from the university hospital. And maybe the most important what we do is victim assessment and therapy. We also have family counseling and support, and we also have instructions to other professionals. And that's why it's so important to gather all the information about sexual abuse cases here in Iceland. So we have this child-friendly environment. Like you can see when the child comes to Barnahus, this is the first thing they see. It looks a little bit like a normal household. Even though we are a governmental institution, it doesn't look like an institution, since we try to have this child-friendly environment. So our address is hidden, and the first thing the child sees is a sofa when they come in, and pictures on the wall are made by children. Usually we give children something when they come, like a juice or something, because usually when children come to some places, there's always provided or given coffee, tea, or water. So to help the child to understand that they are welcomed, we give them some juice if they want. So the environment is something we use to minimize the anxiety the child might have when they come, since they are coming here to tell us a very difficult thing, like sexual abuse they have been victims of. We have 8 appropriate waiting rooms. You can see the waiting room is for young children on the upper picture, and the picture down below is a waiting room for teenagers. We also provide some family therapy if needed, and also group therapy for children who have finished individual therapy. Accessibility in Barnahus, we are safe for all children. We have a neutral location. We are quite close to the main bus station in Reykjavik, even though we are outside in the residential area. Our house is 2 floors and 2 doors. And when we are interviewing children, we have an IT link to the court. But since COVID-19, all the courts around Iceland have now access to closed Zoom link to Barnahus. So all the people who are watching the interview are staying in the court, and the children come to Barnahus. I will tell you that about our system later. And we also have access for handicapped and disabled children. So we serve all children in Iceland. Here you can see some pictures from inside of our house. This is from the therapy rooms. We have therapy in every offices. And you can see there is a special therapy room for younger children, and I will tell you more about that later. So if we talk about the forensic interviews here in Iceland, the court judge is always in charge of the procedure. The forensic interview is copied on DVD disc, so the child under the age of 15 never has to come and witness in the court. And the questionnaire in Iceland is educated in children's development. Most of us are psychologists, and we are trained in forensic interviewing. And that is something that we think that is very important, that you can have this knowledge in children's development, because we it's important to understand children's disabilities. Sometimes we have children with autism, we have children with ADHD, we have children with some developmental issues, and so on. So it's very important that you can read both the body language and the child's behavior when you're interviewing the child. Before we have this forensic interview, we always have this multidisciplinary and interagency meeting before the interview, where the prosecutor, the police, the Child Protection Service, and the interviewer meet and talk about the case. And we talk about some issues the police needs to find out, questions they need, and something which might be helpful in investigation of a sexual abuse case. When we interview the child, if the group is, or the interagency, or the every people who are watching the interview is coming to Barnahus, they are sitting in this room you see the picture of, and they follow the interview through the TV screen. The court judge is in charge, and then we also have participating is someone from the prosecution. It's one from the police, or might be two policemen. It's a Child Protective Service who is representative. The child's legal advocate is also presenting, and the defense lawyer, and the alleged offender can be also when we are interviewing the child, but it's very seldom. Since this is a court hearing, we need to have the judge in charge so the child don't need to come to the court later in this, if the case goes all the way to the courtroom. And that's why we need to think about equality of arms. So that's why the defense lawyer needs to be present so he or she can ask questions through the interviewer. Just to give you some numbers is that when a child discloses about sexual abuse case, we did some research how long time it takes from the case to come all the way to Barnahus. And in 50% of cases, we have interviewed the child within a week from the police getting the case. And 75% of cases were within 2 weeks in Barnahus. And that is what we all, in our law, we aim, both the court, the police, and everyone aim to prioritize those cases. And it's very important to interview the child as soon as possible because of the traumatization of the child, and also to so we can how can I say, not miss any information, since young children especially, they forget very quickly. We also have so-called preliminary interview or exploratory interview, and that is just the Child Protection Service who is witnessing the interview, and that is at the request of the Child Protection Service. We do those preliminary or exploratory interview at the request of the Child Protection Service if the disclosure is very weak or ambitious, or the offender, for example, is below the age of criminal responsibility, which is 15 years in Iceland. And also in cases where the offender has not been identified. But also when children show some sexual behaviors, it's very important for the Child Protection Service to get help so we can ask the child if they have been, why they are showing the sexual behavior, for example. The interviewing room is specially designed. You can see here pictures of 2 interviewing rooms. It's a little bit bigger. It seems on the pictures quite small, but it's a little bit bigger than the pictures show. It's a child-friendly setting, but it's also neutral and safe for the child. We have two cameras, one who is focusing on the child and the facial expression the child might show, and the other camera is showing the whole room. We don't have any distractions in the room since the young children, they might want to play or something. So it's very important for the interviewer to get the eye contact with the child. And we tell the child and give them information about all the people who are watching, all the people who are present. And everyone can ask questions through the questionnaire since we have an earplug in our ear, so that every question that need to be asked go through the judge, and the judge asks through the questionnaire or the interviewer. We have two types of forensic interviews, like I told you, investigative interview and exploratory interview. I'm not going to go deeper into that since I told you before. But the investigative interview, those are the cases who are referred to the police. And the exploratory interviews might be, for example, siblings who are siblings to someone who is victim of sexual abuse case or something like that. There is also a huge difference between a forensic interview and a therapeutic interview. And I'm not going to go deeper into that since we all who are interviewing children here in Barnahus, we are also therapists, but that gives us a good information about the shame and the feelings and the disclosure of children. So this is something that you can go deeper into and look into yourself. This is a table which explains estimated age-appropriate questions in forensic interviewing. And this is very helpful. We have it on our wall. This is specially made for the judge so they can understand what kind of questions child or children in different ages can disclose about. So if we look at a 4-year-old, they can tell you who did something, what happened, where it happened, and then maybe just in grandmother's house or something like that. But few of them can tell you how. It's not until the age of 11 the children can give you the whole scenario, what happened from the beginning to the end. And after we put this table on the wall, tablet on the wall, this was very helpful. So usually now the judges are informed what kind of questions children can possibly answer. So this is something that we think is very important. So just to mention the medical examination we have here in Barnahus, both the police and the Child Protection Service can can send a request and the referrals about medical examination in Barnahus. We have a very experienced pediatrician, nurse, and gynecologist who come all together as a team in medical examination of the child who might have been sexually abused. Usually after their disclosure, we see if the child needs a medical examination or not. So it's only in maybe 10% of cases where the child needs medical examination. So we never put child through this medical examination unless they have disclosed about intercourse or we suspect that it might have been some intercourse. This is a child-friendly examination, and usually it's the parents who think it's more difficult than the child themselves. We are using video colposcope, where you don't have to, you can see on the right side of the picture, and you never need to touch the child's vagina. Usually it's for the girls, and you are looking if the hymen has been destroyed in some way or damaged. So it's just in 1% of cases where you need to have this anesthesia in a hospital. And usually children get opportunity there to ask the doctor a question. So sign of progress, since we started Barnahus, significantly higher rate of detection and investigation, prosecution, and sentencing in cases here in Iceland. And the incidence rate has increased from 1.5 to 3.1. The number of cases are investigated has more than doubled. Indictments have more than tripled, and convictions have more than doubled. So those who can send referrals to Barnahus are the Child Protection Service all around the country for exploratory interview, medical examination, and assessment and treatment. And the court judge all around the country can send us referrals for investigative interview. So the system in Iceland is, when there's a suspicion of abuse, usually the case is reported to the Child Protection Service, since we have a mandatory report to the Child Protection Service according to our law. So if a case goes directly to the police has a mandatory report to the Child Protection Service. So as you can say, the Child Protection Service in Iceland is always in the middle of every case where you have a child who has disclosed about abuse of any case of abuse. So when the Child Protection Service gets a case, they decide if they want to involve the police. If the child has disclosed about a criminal act, they always report it to the police. If we have a weak or suspicion, the child hasn't disclosed about anything, but they show sexual behavior, something like that, the Child Protection Service can refer the case to Barnahus for an exploratory interview. If the child starts to disclose in the exploratory interview about a criminal act or about sexual abuse, we usually stop the interview and ask the child if they can come and give the whole description later. And then it's the same interviewer who will speak to the child. So when a police starts the investigation, they give the child a legal advocate, which is paid by the government, and they usually have some pre-investigation, like interviewing the offender, for example, and usually send the case immediately to the court judge, so the court can ask for an investigative interview. When children have disclosed about sexual abuse, they usually get assessment and treatment. Should have immediately, but since we have so many cases after the COVID, it's a waiting list for therapy here in Barnahus. But it should be that all children get therapy immediately after the disclosure. So the interagency planning and case review, the formal procedure and routines are planning and routines and mutual agreement procedure. We are doing some case planning and review of each case, and those meetings take place regularly. We are continuously case tracking, especially when child has come to therapy. We are tracking the case, seeing where if the police are still investigating the case and so on. And we are supporting the person who is, the child, father or mother or non-offending parent, and of course supporting the child. So if we look at the factors on the child's disclosure, we need to have in mind is that factors who are related to the child is that usually children take responsibility of what happened because they think that they might have done something else. They might have run away. They might have done something that didn't make this abuse happen and something like that. Grooming is very often that the child has been groomed and told that this is a secret between them and the offender. And especially if we think about children with autism, when a grown-up tells them that something is a secret, then they keep the secret because they are always doing as they are told. Sometimes the child has been threatened or they have been given some gifts and they have received some maybe money, especially teenagers. And that is also something that we need to have in mind that may avoid them for disclose. They are afraid of being judged for something usually they think they have participated in something, especially if the child has been forced to touch the offender. Usually the children, they have told me that they are afraid to disclose about that since they think that they are offenders themselves and might be charged for criminal act. Sometimes they are afraid of not being believed by their mothers or father or non-offending parent or the society. And they are also afraid of ignorance. And the things and facts that are related to the family or friends of the offender themselves is that offender might be a family member or a friend. And they are afraid to tell or disclose about someone they loved. They maybe love this person even though they hate the act or the violence they put the child through. They are afraid of the consequences. They know what they have and they are not aware of what might happen after the disclosure. And those complex feelings are making them a little bit how can I say, destroyed in their or their feelings what to do, even though they know it's not allowed to abuse sexually. Since all children, both in kindergartens, in the first grade, in the fifth grade, and through all the school, they are getting information about what is allowed and what is not allowed in sexual abuse cases and physical abuse. If we look at the forensic interviewing, our protocol is evidence-based. We usually use this NCAC protocol, which is from the National Child Advocacy Center. The NICHD protocol is so familiar to many of you, maybe. Both of those protocols are focusing on the same thing, asking open-ended questions. It's not non-judgmental, it's truth-seeking and neutral. And both of them are evidence-based. If I just tell you a little bit about the background of those protocols is that a psychologist and a prosecutor together focused on this protocol and made this protocol aiming for what is important for the police and the investigators, what information they seek, and what is good for the child to get a free recall from the child. So these protocols are both accurate, credible, and complete information and precise documentation and we are using this DVD recording where the police get one record and the court get one record. So in Iceland, when a case gets all the way to the courtroom is playing the DVD disc, which is the child's witnessing in the court. The goal of the interview is to maximize information from the child. Oh, sorry, it should be their child, not his child. It's also to minimize the impact of the interview on the child and to minimize contaminating effects on the child's memory, and also to maintain integrity. So we see the child's memory as a new fallen snow, and we need to use all the evidence we might get from the child. So by asking the child a lot of questions before the main interview can have this contaminating effect on the child's memory. So that's why it's so important that we interview children as soon as possible. So the fundamental principles is to emphasize an open-ended questions in this protocol we are using. So by using open-ended questions, we see it as a funnel approach, and you should use the yellow column where you have this yellow color, open-ended questions. And sometimes you need to do some pairing. But what we need to do is to think about and use what the child just said. And we should, as interviewers, listen more and talk less. So if you're a good interviewer, you should talk like 30% and the child 70% of the time. So just to give you some more information about this fundamental principles or funnel approach, is that when we ask open-ended questions or get some free recall from the child, the quality of the information is 91%. And the quantity of questions we are asking are around maybe 20%. And it's increasing the more closed questions we are asking. So if we are asking in the yellow space, questioning like explain, describe more, or specific questions like the WH questions like who, where, what, you need to ask more questions than if you say to the child, tell me why are you here today? Or tell me all about why you are here today. And the red space is where you have leading questions. Did this happen? And then you're using like yes or no questions. And quantity of the questions you need to ask are more than quality you will get from the questions. So just to explain, for you, how we use this technique is I was interviewing a 5-year-old girl who had been touched by her private parts by a neighbor. And this girl, she said, I asked her, why are you here today? We have stage 1. I will tell you a little bit more about that later. But I asked her, why are you here today, when I was in step 2 in the interview protocol. And she said, I was walking on my street and he asked me to come and he touched my private parts. If I would ask her leading questions or questioning in the yellow space, I would say, was it outside the clothes or under your clothes? Usually, when you have a 5-year-old, if you ask her, for example, yes or no questions, she would say yes or no, usually to the last question. And then I needed to ask again, because I asked 2 questions in a row. So was it within your clothes or inside your clothes? Then I'm giving her information. Maybe we have children who have been touched outside their clothes, but we don't want the child to get more information about possible sexual abuse cases than she came with before she was interviewed. So instead of asking her leading questions or yes or no questions like that, I asked her, okay, what kind of clothes did you have that day? And she told me everything, color of her clothes and her underwear. And then I'm playing like not knowing and asking her, okay, hey, how could he touch your private part if you had all those clothes on? And just asking her in a way like not knowing what happened. And also I'm curious about how could that happen? And she said, sometimes you are like playing a little bit dumb, but she said, no, you don't understand. He took me, placed me on a table and dragged down my trousers and underwear and touched my private parts. So by just asking one question, which is an open-ended and asking for free recall from the child, I get much more information from that young girl than if I would ask her questions about, did he touch your private part? Tell me, was it outside your clothes or inside your clothes? And so on. So this is just to give you some information about the question type. Then we have a single versus multiple events. If a children have been abused in more than once or in multiple occasions, it can be difficult for children to recall one individual occurrence from a set of repeated or similar events. So that can be very difficult sometimes to interview children, but it's our role as an interviewer to find out some variance in the child's disclosure, to find out how often things might have happened. For example, if I ask you about your Christmas 2016, and usually, especially here in Iceland, we have similar Christmas time, similar rituals each Christmas. So that's why it's difficult for us to tell what happened at Christmas 2016. But if I would focus on, tell me the Christmas time where you had the yellow dress on, then you might remember Christmas time and what happened that year. So this is just to give you information about how we try to find out in multiple occasions where children have been abused several times. So what we are focusing on are the recall memory, because recall memory is triggered by non-direct, open-ended questions. Those information we get by the child using the recall memory is the most salient, understandable, and speakable to children, because they are using their own words, their own memory, and usually the child's recall is coming from their own memory and experience. But it can also be risk of omission, that we might miss something that is important. And we are getting information from this recall memory by asking, tell me everything about, help me to understand what happened next, and so on. Sometimes we need to focus on the recognitional memory, and that is triggered by specific focused questions, sometimes yes or no questions, or multiple choice questions, where you have give them maybe two choices. But this is something that we need to delay as long as possible. For example, to give you information about the recognitional memory, is if some of the sexual abuse case happened in a car, and I have information about that, I might say, was there any car? And that might help the child to recognize or remember a case that happened in the car. But this is something we need to delay as long as possible, because we have some contamination risk, especially with youngest children. And that is also giving us a weaker information than in this, where we are focusing on recall memory. I think we need to have some break now, or I will have some questions now before we have some break. So you have opportunity to ask me something which or maybe go deeper into something that is interesting you.
Thank you very much, Ólöf. It's a lot of information to proceed. So perhaps we have some first questions. I can see there is one question in the chat box. Could you please translate me? I will read it in French. So, merci pour la présentation.
Thank you for your presentation.
Vous dites qu'il faut rapidement s'entretenir avec la victime pour qu'elle n'oublie pas. Comment faire lorsque nous sommes informés tardivement d'un abus, d'une violence sexuelle?
In a later, if it usually children are disclosing about something that happened sometimes many years ago, or usually children don't disclose immediately after the occasion happened. But the thing is that it's very important that when children are opening up for a case or starting to disclose, it's very important that we interview them as soon as possible, so their parents or the non-offending parents or the people who are in the child's surrounding don't ask them too many questions, because we are used to ask leading questions. And I will talk about, after the break, children's suggestibility. But sometimes in many countries, you don't have possibility to ask or interview children so early after their disclosure. And then it's possible that the child, or there has been some, how can I say, something has affected their possibility to disclose. Some people who might have been in contact with them who don't want them to disclose. So there's always a contamination risk in case where you don't have the possibility to ask the child or give the child a possibility to disclose as soon as possible. But sometimes we need to work with what we have. So this is it's much better to ask a child later than never. So I think if I understand the question right, then it's the only possible thing you have is to ask them then later. But as soon as possible is something that we need to aim for. I hope I answered the question right.
I have another question. I will read it in French too, so please translate. So, au moment de l'audition, donc dans certains pays, l'auteur de l'abus de violence peut être aussi présent. Comment vous faites pour que cela soit réalisable? Est-ce que l'enfant arrive à parler devant son bourreau, surtout si cet agresseur est un adulte?
Yes, thank you for that question. Yeah, that's always difficult, since we are, even though the case is still in pre-investigation, we are interviewing children like it was in the court hearing later. Since the whole scenario takes a long time in Iceland, it can take 1 year since the case is reported to the police until the case is in the court. And I think that's in other countries too. But when we are doing this in that way, since it's a court hearing, the offender might be, but it's very seldom, because the offender's defense lawyer, they don't want them to be in Barnahus, and Barnahus is not an offender-friendly place. But if they are participating, we need to how can I say, help that the child never meets the offender. That's why we have 2 doors. We have 2 floors and 2 doors. So usually, if we should know that in forehand, but we need to inform the child in the interview that the offender is there. It has happened a few times when I have been interviewing children, and I usually I tell them it's very important for you, even though he or she, the offender, is present, it's very important for you to let him know both your feelings and your experience about what happened. And usually that gives the child a power to disclose. I think I've been a forensic interviewer and worked here in Barnahus for 20 years. So I think it's around 7 cases since I started working here, the offender has been present. And in most of the cases, I would say 95% of those 7 cases, it went well. And if you're a good interviewer, the child forgets about all the people who are present and watching, and that you are doing this, they are, alone with you in the interviewing room. So most of the cases, it's okay, but we prioritize that the offender is not present. Also, the judge is in charge, and just 2 weeks ago, the offender came here with his defense lawyer, and they didn't inform the judge, and the judge said, you're not allowed to be here. So he asked the offender to leave the place. So that can also happen.
Thank you. I have another question in the chat box. I will read it in Spanish for the translation. So, en Perú, las niñas que sufren violencia sexual pasan por diversas instancias para certificar el delito, desde la comisaría, médico legal y desalojo de la familia para ser internada por protección en una institución. Todo esto enfocado en el tema legal, que es importante, pero hay un vacío en la atención de la propia niña. Se revictimiza a la niña. ¿Cuál es el proceso para que la niña llegue a ustedes? Y veo que el tratamiento es diferente. ¿Puede explicarme eso, por favor?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you for that question. The procedure here in Iceland is that the Child Protection Service usually are involved immediately when a child discloses about sexual abuse. So if the offender is one of the family members or they are living in the child's household, we have, according to the law, should the offender leave the home. If, for usually the mothers, if they are supporting the child, then the child stays at home and the offenders leave the home and is not allowed to go any nearby while the case is investigating, when the police is investigating the case. If the mother is, or the non-offending parent is not supporting the child, usually the child is put into foster care where there is some relatives, for example, grandfathers or grandmother, who are supporting the child. But the Child Protection Service needs to focus on is the grandparents supporting the child. If they cannot trust those grandmother or grandfathers or other relatives, they are put into foster care for a short-term foster care. We don't have any institutions in Iceland. So that's something that we think is very, very bad thing, to put a child or take the child out of the home if the child doesn't want it. We can secure the child, or how can I say, we can provide that the child is not re-victimized by avoiding that the offender is staying at the home. So this is the primary thing we do. If that's not possible, then we try foster care or put the child into the grandparents' house or someone relatives. That's always the first choice if the mother is not supporting the child. So that's what is very important, that we are taking away the person who is, how can I say, the cancer in the home. So by taking the child outside of the home and put them in an institution or a foster care, then you're telling that the child is I'm missing the English word, sorry, but then you're saying that the child is the problem in the household, which is not, it's the offender. So we need to give a clear information or clear statement that the offender is the one who's the problem, not the child.
It's very clear, I think. Thank you very much, Ólöf. So if it is okay for everyone, we can make a 10-minute break and then we will come back for the second part. So just before we start, we had a great message from Georgia. From Daturi Gigitashvili. 2 years ago, I had the opportunity to visit your wonderful country and also your center. Thanks again for this opportunity and for sharing the experience.
Thank you. It was nice.
Okay, so now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Okay, then we will continue with suggestibility. The degree to which one's memory or recounting of event is influenced by suggested information or misinformation. Okay, then we are talking about suggestibility. Yeah, that can be a result of because some children are being told what to say, and that's something that happened very often in custody battle when parents are trying, or especially mothers are trying to use the system in the custody battle. Sometimes if children have been questioned in a way that alters their recollection of the event. But what I want to have in mind, or you to have in mind, that children who are 10 years or over are no more suggestible than adults. But it's greater risk with younger children, especially younger than 10, if, like I told you before the break, that when you have a lot of people in the child's surrounding who might ask the child a lot of leading questions. And that's also a greater risk with children who have less developmental cognitive skills than others. And it's also a greater risk when using recognitional prompts, as I told you before. So avoid introducing new information about the topic of concern is something that we need to have in mind, because some mildly suggestive questions may be necessary in the interview, but words should be chosen with care when you are interviewing children. It can seriously compromise accuracy when child is 5 years or younger, or if repeated interviewed. Like I mentioned in the beginning, if you are having a very young children who are repeatedly interviewed, that can be difficult. So if we focus on the interviewer, like here in Barnahus in Iceland, the interviewer is educated in children's development. And what is very important when you're interviewing children is to read the child's behavior, because they can sit upright and so on when they are talking about their family, the schools, their interest, and so on. And when the child starts to disclose about this abuse, then they might react that they are having, they are getting more anxious, and they are afraid or something, they are scared. And that's something that is important to notice, because when the child starts to show anxiety or show anxious behavior, you need to talk about something which is less focused on the abuse. For example, when I was interviewing a girl who had been raped by a friend, when she started to talk about what really happened, the main rape, she started to shake. And while she was shaking, I saw her anxiety level was getting higher and higher. And then you can lean a little bit back and talk about which is less anxious for her, I asked her to tell me what she saw in the room about the interior. And then I saw how her anxiety level get lower and lower, and she was more relaxed. And then we went back into the rape and what happened. And then her anxiety after a while level started to get higher again, and then we're talking about something else. So we go back and forward in this interview just to help the child to cope with their feelings and so on. Because it's very important that we lower the pressure on the child, not to harm the child with our interview. And it's also important for us to know that it's important not to harm the child with unsuitable questions. Like a boy who was asked while he was abused if he had an erection while abused. And that is an unsuitable question and harmful for that boy. So this is something we need to have in mind and read the body language. For example, if we have children who have ADHD, it's important that you're not focusing on letting the child sit on the chair the whole time. The child needs to move on in the room. I have had children who are crawling into my knees when they are disclosing about the event. Some 6-year-old girl, she was sitting on my shoulder while she was disclosing. One child may be rolling on the floor. Because if you are focusing on letting the child sit on the chair, all the focus for the child will go on sitting. So let them move, let them express themselves in the way they are as comfortable as possible. So the interviewing structure is stage 1, where we had this rapport building with the child. We have some introduction with the child. The child is telling about their families and so on. We are talking about the interest. We are talking about their schools and families in the end. This is very important because we are not so curious about the child. We are helping the child to lower their anxiety. Because when a child comes into an interview like that, it's very difficult for them. But if they get a lot of easy questions, who they are specialized in, like their schools, their interests, it's so helpful for them to relax. For example, a narrative practice can be they are playing football. Tell me everything about your football. Then we are practicing those open-ended questions so the child gets touch how this interview structure is. We also have our interview instructions and ground rules in the stage 1. And the ground rules are, if you don't understand my questions, you can ask me to talk in a different way. If I'm asking you the same question again, you should say, give me the same answer, because when children are asked the same question again, they think that I didn't like their answer and they will give me another or little bit different answer. So giving them information that they can say, I don't know, they can ask me to talk in a different way, and understand that if I'm asking the same question, it's just because I forget that I already had asked this question. And then we go also through a truth or a lie ceremony in those ground rules and focus on do they understand the difference between truth or a lie. And then we make some, how can I say, we ask them if they will tell the truth just here in this interview. So that is very important, that they will give us and promise to tell the truth. I always tell them they are allowed to say all the words and just use words they are very common with. In stage 2, it's a substantive phase where it is a transition to the topic, and usually we open this stage 2 by asking, why are you here today? Like I mentioned a little bit earlier. And then we get the narrative description. We do some, in the end, follow-up questions and clarification. And in the end, we do some closure. And we always thank them for coming and talking to us, not for their disclosure. And that's also something that is important. Detailed questions are very important for the investigation and make your child to provide the missing elements, of course. We should delay until narrative invitation and focused narrative questions have exhausted. Like who, what, where, when, and how. But we should never ask child why, because then we are blaming the child. Just to give you some reflections, is that research show that younger children, 4 or 5-year-old, give us 2 times more information for open-ended questions like tell me about, or if we would use questions like yes or no questions. But if we look at 8 or 9-year-old children, they gave us equally as much information as younger children if we ask them yes or no questions. But those children gave us 4 times more information for every tell me more questions than in yes or no questions. So this is something that we need to have in mind. And that's very important for the police or the investigation of cases, that they will get as much information as possible. If we look at the victim therapy we have here in Barnahus, we provide victim therapy soon after the interview. It should be like that, but since the COVID, we have extremely many cases, and we need more staff here in Barnahus so we can give or provide therapy to all children in need. We here in Barnahus have a long-term therapy, and for children who disclose about sexual abuse or physical abuse cases. All our therapy programs are based on individual needs and is age appropriated, and the DVD recorded child's disclosure can be used also for the therapist, because the interviewer is never the therapist. So if I'm interviewing a child, I'm not the therapist, it's someone else, because usually we start in therapy to talk about how they felt in the interview and explain to them why they're asked in the way they are and how they felt and so on. And according to the law in Iceland, the therapy is practiced in the child's hometown. So we just have one Barnahus in Iceland, and usually the therapist is the witness in the court proceedings later on. So since the child can get the therapy in their hometown, is the psychologist in Iceland or in the Barnahus Iceland who is the one who travels around Iceland. So just to give you a short information about Iceland, is quite big country. It's 4 times bigger than Denmark, for example. So the distances are quite long and far away. So we drive within the driving distance of the day, and we use domestic airplanes. And we have at least 5-6 places where you can have domestic airplanes. So we fly across Iceland. And for example, in the northern part of Iceland, we have a Barnahus, a place where we have all the equipment. It's a satellite. So I, for example, have 2 therapists traveling to Akureyri in the northern part, since it's quite a lot of people living there. So my therapists who work here in Barnahus, they travel at least once in a week to those places they have children in therapy. But 75% of the Icelandic population live within the Reykjavik area, so that's why most of the children come to Barnahus. About the assessment, in the beginning of therapy, we provide some pictures of what's going in with the child in the mind, and we use the assessment to help us to determine symptoms the child show, what kind of therapy they need, and so on. And we use this assessment in the first maybe 2 to 4 sessions, depending on the child's need. And that helps us to develop a treatment plan for the child, and it also enables the therapist to assess treatment progress. Usually we use some formal standardized measures. We also use our clinical notes, as we say sometimes, and to measure the child's needs of therapy. When assessment of trauma in younger children can be very difficult sometimes, especially with children under the age of 7, and then the assessment of trauma is done and focusing on the problem the child show, if they have sleeping problems, if they have anxiety problems, and that needs more involvement of parents or caregivers when we are having our sessions. And that also needs an observation of the parent or caregiver in the child interaction. And we also have some standardized assessment tools, but that's difficult for children younger than 7. Assessment tools we have, those are the, just to give you some ideas of the tools we use. We use a lot Beck's depression inventory, Beck's youth inventories, and CDI, and that's for older children, older than 16. And MASK is an assessment tool we use for anxiety children. The other ones we don't use a lot. But the UCLA, which is helping us to assess the post-traumatic stress disorder, is something we use for all children. So all children who come to Barnahus in therapy, we use this UCLA index, which is DCM-5. So since Iceland is between the the USA and the Europe, we are often using a lot of stuff we receive from the USA part. Types of therapy we use is according to the World Health Organization. We only use evidence-based programs. What we usually use is TFCPT, which is trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which is the most common and most used here in Barnahus. And this is a website I put there just to give you some information. There you can have a 20 hours session in trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, and that is very helpful for you who are interested in that type of therapy program. For older children, we use cognitive processing therapy. That's for grown-ups, but you can use it down to the age of 16. So sometimes we use that in children who are 16 to 18. But my opinion is that it's difficult for teenagers since it's a lot of homework, and teenagers, they really don't like homework. So that's something that we are not using so much. Children who are not traumatized or show symptoms of trauma, then we are using cognitive behavioral therapy. Two of my psychologists are trained as EMDR therapists, which is eye movement desensitization and deep reprogressing. I'm not familiar with that unless I have heard about it, but we are using it here. And that is very helpful for children who are reluctant, who have difficulties going through the trauma narrative, for example. Psychoeducation we are using a lot, especially with young children. We help them to understand. We use color books. We use a lot of books to help them with this psychoeducation. We also have possibility to use play therapy, sound therapy, or art therapy in the trauma narrative, where we go through the trauma part of their story. And also behavioral modification. In the end of each therapy, we are building self-esteem or self-respect, especially the teenagers, because children who are victims of sexual violence, they are usually having a very, very low self-esteem, which we need to build up in the end of therapy. And it is very important that we see the child and focusing on helping the child coping with their experience and sending them out after therapy that they are even stronger than before they were victims of violence of any kind. And we also have family therapy. Mostly it's like an assessment, just helping the family to cope with the child's victims and the child's abuse, but it's just non-offending parents. Especially when we have younger children who are younger than 6, usually the parents are blaming themselves and focusing on helping the family or parents to cope with what happened to their child is very important, since the parents are the most or prior caregiver. So that's what we try to focus on also. So this is just our Bible in the TFCBT. It's an evidence-based treatment. I'm not going deeper into that since we don't have time. And this is a therapy who is developed for youth or young children from 3 to 18-year-old. And the time or structured are 12 to 20 sessions. And the parents are integral part of the treatment. This is also a book, just to give you some information about cognitive processing therapy. This is also evidence-based treatment. But here we are focusing on 12 sessions usually. But of course, some children need more time, more sessions, some of them fewer sessions. It depends on each child. So we are focusing on, in cooperation with the parents, the child, and the Child Protection Service, how many sessions each child needs. And this is just to give you, here's also a web where you can get information about this CPT therapy. EMDR, I'm not going, this is just on the slide so you can look into it. And here's also a YouTube for you to watch if you're interested in that therapy part or program. So here's just to give you some numbers from 2018 until 2020. The number of forensic interviewing and the exploratory interviews. So you can see the yellow columns are interviewing for the court, and the blue ones are exploratory interview for the Child Protection Service. So if we look at the years here in Iceland, 2018 to 2020, then we had in a court hearing, this is the number of forensic interviewing cases here in Iceland, where you can see that court hearings were around 120 cases in 2018, and it increased a lot 2019, and 2020 it was most of the cases we ever had here in Iceland, and this is the year of the COVID. And the reason is, this is the yellow column is the court hearing, the blue column, which is almost the same through those 3 years, is the Child Protection Service who are asking for exploratory interviews. And the red is the total forensic interviewing in Icelandic Barnahus. So what you can see that the COVID year 2020, we interviewed for the court a lot of cases. So if we look at the next slide, which is the comparison between sexual and physical violence, sexual abuse cases and physical violence, you can see that usually through all those years, and also from 2016, we had around 40 cases, 43 up to 47 cases each year in physical abuse cases. But in the year 2020, our COVID year, COVID-19, you can see that it more than doubled the physical abuse cases in Iceland. And this is just court hearings. And also the sexual abuse cases increased. Most of the sexual the increasement in the sexual abuse cases were digital abuse cases where children have been abused through the internet. So we got a lot of cases in that field. And the physical abuse has also increased since the people were closed at their homes, even though the Iceland were just few COVID cases each month or each week, but the schools were always ongoing, but the families were more close together, and the drinking problems within the home increased a lot, and that made the physical violence more. So this is a total different year from the other years, and also the numbers I have seen for year 2021, it has increased more than 2020. And that is most of the internet sexual violence cases and the physical violence cases. So just in the end, after our 20 years of experience, what we have learned is that efficient, professional, and child-friendly work procedures and case management, re-victimization of the child is minimized, appropriate therapeutic service is secured for all children who disclose about sexual abuse, except for this year or the last year, since we have a long waiting list now since the cases have increased so much over those COVID years. Mutual professional trust among those different agencies, and that's especially the judges, the defense lawyers, and the prosecutor and the police. Those people who work in that field are all on board. But it took, I would say, around 10 years to get trust among those different agencies. So it takes time to get all the people on board when you are opening a program like Barnahus. Also, what we have experienced is that assimilation of knowledge and experience is in one place, and we can share our knowledge with all the people or professionals working with children. And we are also have increased the public awareness and confidence in the authorities, and also among children. All the children know about Barnahus and that Barnahus exists and what it stands for. So that has also help children to disclose, since they really know what is allowed and what is not allowed in Icelandic society. And even though we see more children than any other countries we compare us with, like in Northern Europe, for example, we have more children here in Iceland disclosing, even though we don't have more cases if we look at researches who show that around 4% of children are abused sexually. And the increased rate of discovery, what I was meaning. So thank you very much. I just wanted to show, since we have maybe just a few minutes, to show you about how we use sound therapy. In a case, we had a 9-year-old girl, and the offender was her former stepfather. It was just a single incident of sexual abuse. Her parents were divorced and they had joint custody, and she disclosed to her mother the day after the abuse had occurred. So she, in her trauma narrative, she took, this was a picture, or it was a doll made by herself about her stepfather. She asked, when she was going into the trauma narrative in session, I think 7 or 8, she wanted to make her own picture of her stepfather. And she was disclosing about her story, that she was sleeping, she was reading a book. This is how children do when they play through what really happened. She was reading a book, her younger sister was in the same room. She had to find everything, similarities with her room. And she was lying there with reading a book, and she went to sleep. Then her stepfather came into the room and starting to touch her private parts. But the roof was like that. She had to find a roof. And she said always in the interview that she was crawling into the small space, and she couldn't explain better the small space. But this was under the roof. Since her stepfather was quite big, he couldn't reach her, because he was doing like that. And she showed that in therapy. So we take picture of the child's disclosure in the therapy, and that is something we give as when we witness in the courtroom later on. And then she crawled into her sister's bed. He came back and she fought against him and crawled back under the roof, so he couldn't reach her. And then he went back, and he crawled again into her sister's room or bed, and she disclosed to the mother the day after. So now we maybe have some time for some questions.
Yes, thank you very much. It's very interesting, and as I was saying, it's a lot of different things and cooperation between different agencies, and it's a very long experience you have. As you explained, you are working on it in Iceland now for many years. You have specific legislation tailored to this experience, and if in many countries we can just take this experience and like this in Iceland, but we can adapt at least some of these important points, and having in mind always the objective to make the services, the interviewing process as child-friendly as possible. So now we have a few minutes for questions. So while you're thinking about the question, I was wondering during the presentation how the functioning of Barnahus is budgeted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's the state who is funding Barnahus. So we are a governmental institution, so we don't have to worry about anything. But the state is paying our salary and the house and everything around Barnahus, but when we have to travel, for example, by airplane, then it's the municipality who is paying for the travel costs. So since Iceland is a very small country, that's why the state needs to have a specialized therapy or specialized institutions like that. Instead, like if you look at Sweden or Norway or those other Nordic countries, then you have Barnahus or like in each municipality. So that's why it's maybe different in Iceland.
So I take advantage of my status of moderator and I ask another question.
Yeah.
You spoke a lot about, Elsa, about prevention. You've done with children, that all children in Iceland learn about private parts from the smaller age. They know about the existence of Barnahus. How the Barnahus staff contributed to it? Did you contribute to these prevention strategies? Was it one of your goals?
No, it's not. We don't have possibility to do that, but we have been participating in doing, programs for children. Save the Children give all 4-year-old children a book about private parts and that they can deny all touches if they want and they are owners of their body. Then I was part of a program which was a cartoon program which is shown in for every 6-year-old in the school. So we have been helping NGOs and the government to have and inform children in all school, steps in Iceland. So we have been participating in that, and also sometimes for example, when principals of all school are having meeting, we inform them. We have presentations all over. The media is often talking about Barnahus and the importance for children to disclose and so on. So we try to reach to children and also the professionals to help them to understand and see the symptoms children might show who have been sexually abused. So we try to teach them about symptoms so the teachers and those who are in close relation with children can possibly ask the children why they are showing this behavior. Has anyone done anything to your body? And for example, for all 8-year-old children, they get puppet show in their school, talking about physical abuse and sexual abuse and the importance for them to disclose. And then the children are asked, has anyone experienced that? And then you can talk to this person, and they are pointed at some school counselor, for example. So from early stage, they are taught that this is not allowed according to our law. And also all physical punishment is not allowed according to our law. So we try to give the children information. So what we in Barnahus do, it's more like we help them to do it right, and then we let the other professionals about the information to the children.
I think it was very dense and it's a lot of information to process. It's a very complex model with so many actors involved. So thank you a lot for this detailed presentation. I think we will study your PowerPoint more carefully, to better understand how it works.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So for the participants of our webinar, as usual, it will be available on BC YouTube channel. And we will wait for you for our 2 next webinars, which will be done with a Bolivian organization called Breeze of Hope. And they will speak also about multidisciplinary support, psychological rehabilitation of children victims of sexual violence. I don't know, Ólöf, if you want to say some last words to close the session.
Yeah, just I'm happy to be with you here today, and really happy that you could stay with me. And I wish you all the best. Just focus on what's the best. Focus always on the best interest of the child. So we are all in this together. Thank you. I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ólöf. Thank you very much, everyone. See you very soon. Goodbye.